My name is Grant Barrett. I was invited by Sarah because one of her professors met me at LSA in Portland. I do I'll talk about this in a second, but anyway, this is the title of my presentation. This is just a little bit of it's a way of describing our radio show, and I just wanted to talk to you about the radio show and some of the stuff we do, how I take your work and I present it to the public. That's basically what I'm talking about, the things that you're working on or maybe the things that you're learning. And I'm trying to talk about how I take your discipline, generalize a little bit for the general public, and try to just push that ball a little bit, the education along a little bit. Let's see if this, come on now, it's going to work for me. That's good. I always put this on the slide. I'm not going to be offended if you just interrupt me. Raise your hand, shout something out, tell me that you have a different opinion, or if you have a question or something to comment. Just this isn't like it doesn't have to be a one-way lecture. So just raise your hand if you got something for me. My background, just so you know, is as a lexicographer. I started in slang and new word lexicography. I've worked for Oxford University Press and Cambridge University Press and Collins Dictionaries. For a time, I was the new words editor for the Journal of American Speech. This informs everything that I do. There are linguists that we know that would criticize lexicographers because we tend to focus on the lexis. But that's the nature of a lexicographer. We're interested in the nature of words. And it turns out that that's a great bridge to the public. This is a great way to get them interested. Most of the public are more interested in the variety of language that they speak in terms of words. If you start talking about phonemes, morphemes, allophones, they're like, they're not really going to get it. Even if you explain it and they understand it, they're just not really interested. So this actually turns out to be a nice background for what I do. This page, by the way, is from an actual copy of first edition Samuel Johnson's dictionary that I held in my hands. I mean, it's like holding the baby Jesus. I did not use that line when I spoke at the San Diego Christian College on Monday. Not appreciated that. But anyway, so this is just my illustration for that. This kind of also informs the way that I work. This is a great quote from Samuel Johnson. Basically what he's saying is, the lexicographer's problem is that he's always wrong. And if he's not always wrong, he doesn't get any praise for being right. This is the position from which I work. And it turned out to be incredibly useful when dealing with the public when it comes to matter of language. This is, by the way, from the Century Dictionary, which is a great dictionary, which is long forgotten. This is the basic description of our show. We take questions from the public about all aspects of language. We are cautiously descriptivist. And the reason I say cautiously is that most of our audience would not appreciate if we were completely descriptivist. As a matter of fact, we already get emails from people saying, you're too permissive. You're destroying America. Language is being ruined. You guys know this routine. You've heard it all before, right? Language is going to hell in a handbasket. How dare you say that it's okay to use the word irregardless in some circumstances, in some contexts, right? And so cautiously descriptivist means that when we present a descriptivist point of view, we make sure to inform people that we're talking about informal situations or certain registers or the right kinds of contexts. And inversely, we are occasionally prescriptivists. For example, if you are a student and you want to use slang, we kind of say, look, you're a student, you're writing an essay. That's a particular kind of language for a particular circumstance. It is surprising how little information there is in the general public among non-linguists about different registers of language. They kind of get it. They know that they speak differently to their grandparents than they do to their friends. They get that. But when you start breaking it down really specifically and say, as a matter of fact, you probably speak differently to your sister than you do your brother, they almost don't believe you. So cautiously descriptivist means we can't dump the whole descriptivist message right on them all of a sudden as a big data dump. We cannot do that. We parcel it out piece by piece, one gumball at a time, until eventually their mouths are swollen, they're blowing bubbles, and we're all doing the same thing. So, and this last thing, educate and inform, absolutely important. They are not going to listen to the radio show. They're not going to listen to an hour about language if it's not entertaining. Lectures, I mean, there are plenty of lectures online. It's just not good radio, it's not entertaining, people aren't really getting it. Maybe somebody who is taking a linguistics class would appreciate it, but the general public, they want a few laughs. They want to relate, they want some information, they want to go about their business. So this is a description of our show. A little bit more about the show, just so you have it. It is independent, locally produced, nonprofit, broadcast nationwide. And these are all important words. Independent means we're not created, funded, or owned by NPR. They don't give us a dime. Same for KPBS, the local public radio outfit. They don't give us a cent. We are funded from our listeners and from organizations that sponsor us. These are listeners and organizations that believe in the educational mission that we have to change the way that Americans are speaking and thinking about language. That's it in a nutshell. 3 o'clock on Sundays, 89.5 FM. You can also find us on iTunes and free downloads on the web. And the reason I'm giving you these numbers is not just to brag, really, there's a little bit of that. I'm very proud of what we've done with the show in the last 4 or 5 years since we took it over from KPBS, but also to demonstrate that there's a little bit of muscle behind what we're doing. So we have a mission statement, we have a way to execute it, and it's going out to about 250,000 people a week in more than 200 cities, more than 25 states. We just had our biggest podcast month ever. According to the numbers that NPR publishes, we would be ranked in the top 20 of public radio podcasts in terms of our numbers. So we're reaching an audience. We're actually having an impact with that audience. Donations. We depend completely upon donations. This is some idea of the markets that we're in. This circle in New York City is so big just because New York City is so big. Some of these circles, like here and here and here, are because we're actually on the air there. There's a contributing effect there. Where we are broadcast, we're more likely to have podcast listeners. So this is Dallas, Indianapolis, Chicago, that's Madison. We're not actually on the air in the Bay Area, but you can also tell we have big listenership there because it's a big podcast market. Same for New York City. But most of these other places, we are either on the air or there's a big center there. So as you can see, we cover, and this isn't the world map. We have a big international listenership as well. A lot of these people in the international markets are language learners. They're learning English in school. They're second language learners. They either need it for business or for their studies. And they're coming to us because not only do they get some language content, but they hear it in the language they're learning. Absolutely crucial. I'm sure across the hall they deal with this kind of stuff all the time, where learning about a language in the language that you're learning is actually nice and efficient. We receive more than 15,000 phone calls and emails a year. And I just want to tell you, that's not unusual. Anybody that you know who has a public face where they deal with the public and they take questions or speak publicly about language has the same effect. Ben Zimmer, who was the on-language columnist for a while for the New York Times, he replaced William Safire. Safire died, and he's now doing it for the Boston Globe. He's a producer for a website called visualsource.com. He does a whole bunch of other stuff, lots of media appearances. He will also tell you the same thing. Anybody, Jeff Nunberg for Fresh Air, he gets the same kinds of questions. There is an insatiable need to learn more about language, and people are not satisfied with what they're hearing. They're perfectly fine Google. They Google like mad. I mean, they do occasionally. We get questions where you're like, oh, let me just introduce you to this fantastic website called Google, where you can look this up. But for the most part, they make some effort. And what they find is conflicting points of view, information they don't understand. They want an arbiter. They want somebody to help them make the decision. Am I speaking correctly? Is this valid? Am I okay? The reason we save all the emails and voicemails is we can search them. If I get an email on a particular question, I can search all the past contact that we've had, including the voicemails, because they come into Google Voice. Not only they transcribe kind of crappily by Google Voice, but also we have a volunteer looks at every single message, writes a little bit about what it's about, and rates the call in terms of quality, so we can know whether or not that's something we want to talk to in the future program. And so if I get a question about the word irregardless, I can look and say, oh, we've had 800 people contact us about that since 2004. This is incredibly useful because it allows us to shape the way that we built the show. You hear an hour of radio, but there's about 70 work hours behind it. There actually should be a lot more, but we volunteer our time. I volunteer my time for the show. I am not paid for the show. And so what that means is we all have other jobs, we all have other things that we do, other lives and stuff. I mentioned all of these different bits of information because I just wanted to show you that this is part of our educational mission. We are solving a problem of making sure that the people who are non-specialists have information that they need about language. These are just some of the topics from the last 3 days. Just some of the questions that we received. They're all over the place. Absolutely. And you can see here a lot of the verses. People want an arbiter. I've got X, somebody said it should be Y, which is correct. I use Y, somebody said it should be Z. Reference works suggest that I'm wrong. Am I? Some of the questions will never get an answer. this question I really like, but I don't know that I can actually talk about this on the air. Why do we say PO instead of PO? It's a great question, though. It really is. Why do we? And we have to get into that argument, or that discussion, and explain the kind of idea that PO operates, as its own lexical entity, and therefore the whole thing is verb. PO is verb, not the P. Anyway, this is a really common question. It's kind of, I haven't described it well here. It's where people say they'll use myself, when most people think that you should use me. Give it to myself. And we get questions, usually peeves about that, complaints about that all the time. Will you give that to myself? People recognize there's something not quite right there. It's, why do I need that? I want to play this for you. I don't know, does this audio work on this? Yeah. We'll try it. If it doesn't, you guys can just read the transcript. Oh, sorry. This is a call we received in...
Actually, and he called bell peppers that yellow green mango peppers. But he doesn't always add the pepper on. And the first time this ever came up, we were kind of doing it after our talking to you, he asked if I wanted mango on what he was grilling, and I thought, well, that'd be interesting. Sure, why not? And it comes to me, and it's peppers, like bell peppers. I thought, that's strange. And it was the first time really that I spent any time with them, and I thought, I wonder what that was about. I just kind of, I wondered, like, well, I was hoping that. I'm originally from Illinois. Even my English. Your people are almost from east of the hills. It was consistent to me because we would actually live there and live with them. And that's pretty consistently what was called peppers. And speaking with my husband, this is actually something that affects him almost entirely. He's like, why did they call it?
This is nearly a perfect call. This is edited. This isn't the way that we originally talked to her. And I've edited out my co-host and I. This was part of the conversation, so I've made it sound as if she said it spontaneously. But I haven't changed the substance of this. I removed some disfluencies and a few other things like that. The reason that this is a perfect call, well, there are many reasons, and I'll itemize them in a second. But I want you to notice some of the things that are happening here before we get into a little more detail. First, she came to us with information. And this is something that we stress on the show. We are trying to turn people away from peeving about language. The show used to mostly be about people getting pissed off about the way other people spoke. Period. That was it. That was the only kind. For a lot of people in the United States, that is the only kind of language discourse that they know. They do not know how to discuss language unless it's getting upset at somebody else. You don't get upset at your own language usually. You get upset at kids or foreigners. Sorry, I'm a terrible human being. It's time for the smooth jazz segment of the evening. Right? You've seen this already. Even those of you who have just started the linguistic program, you've probably encountered this. You talk to your friends and your family about the classes that you're taking. And after they say, oh, you're a linguist, how many languages do you speak? What do they then say? They say, well, I noticed the other day, I heard this guy on the radio, and he said, and they've got something. And it's couched in anger. It's couched in frustration. Sometimes it's couched in dislike or hatred. Sometimes there's racism in the back of it, or at least ethnic bias behind it. Right? It's always some other. And so the reason this call is fantastic is Annie, who has apparently listened to the show for a while, has heard my co-host and I say, what you really need to do when you find yourself upset about something in language is fine, go ahead and have the emotion, but then find out why. Get the information. Unfortunately, she's in a situation here with her in-laws where it doesn't pay actually for her to be like, oh, you're just so stupid. Everybody knows that's not a mango. How many of you knew that bell peppers were called mangoes in part of the country? Had no idea, right? Well, I'll show you a little bit more about this, but along the Ohio River Valley, it's fairly ordinary. As a matter of fact, it's so common along the Ohio River Valley that we got 2 calls from a produce delivery man. The first time we talked about this, he was so excited, he had to call twice. And he said, what we do is we label our produce. So we have boxes of mango peppers that go out, and we have boxes of mango fruit that go out. So that there's because they've had confusion in the past, delivering mangoes to the store was the wrong kind of mango somewhere in Indiana. And so they solved the problem by making sure the produce is labeled. But you wouldn't know this in the rest of the country unless you listen to our show. Our show, and you know that title, that silly title about what a bridge sounds like? This is what a bridge sounds like. I am bringing this particular tidbit of this regional variation to the rest of the country. And we do this time and time again. And again, given my biases as somebody who's been involved with the American Dialect Society for 20 years, who has been an officer for the society for 10 years, I mainly hang with sociolinguists. My wife is a sociolinguist and a lexicographer. I actually met her at a Dictionary Society of North America conference. So how bad is that? Our house, this is my background. But the thing is, still, this is an entry point for a lot of people. Oh, there's a word that's different for some other people. I can get into that. I can kind of relate to that. You've all already heard or talked about the Coke Pop Soda thing, right? I mean, this is Linguistics 101, right? You already know about this, right? Coke, Pop, and Soda. Some people say, you didn't know this?
This is the second week.
Come on, watch out! Well, the short version is that in the West, they tend to say soda, except around St. Louis, where I'm from, we also say soda. In the South, all soft drinks are Coke, regardless of the brand. In other large parts of the country, it's pop. A few places it's tonic, a few places it's fizzy water. But this is one of these great discussions about why we have this language variation, right? In St. Louis, the reason we have the language variation is because Anheuser-Busch and the bottling companies there that made the soda brands, because they make soda as well as beer, that was their marketing. It was soda. That was the name that they used because they used the language from their people. And so you've got this bubble within the Anheuser-Busch kind of like marketing area where everyone says soda. And outside that, it's either Coke or it's pop, at least in Missouri, where I'm from. St. Louis has got its own things. You probably know something about this, right? St. Louis has got this weird kind of, it's like a I don't know, like this tentacle comes down from Chicago down Highway 55, and it's got all kinds of weird stuff, and it's got some variants that come from the German Catholic background, and it's just, St. Louis is very weird that way. They say far, 1, 2, 3, far, instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, just strange stuff. Anyway, mango. So what she meant was, what she thought they were talking about was this kind of mango, right? What they were actually talking about was this kind of mango, right? Two different names. And as we're explaining this to the listeners, now picture yourself as a radio producer, except for you, because you have the technical issue. No, I'm kidding. No, but picture yourself as a radio producer. How do I make this palatable to a general audience? Well, we've already got a good start. Annie, I don't know if you could really hear that call. Annie sounded friendly, right? She sounded like somebody that you could know. She had a good laugh. She was giggly. She wasn't being judgmental. She had a positive, upbeat. And she ended with that great line. Why did they call them that? She framed her question, brought information to the table, told us a story about this barbecue, and said, why did they call them that? Great. It's like I couldn't have picked a better call. Well, we can go to the Dictionary of American Regional English. We can find some stories about this. I can relay this information generally, but this is a dictionary definition. What am I getting by relaying the dictionary definition to the listener? I'm kind of getting there. Here's a little bit more. This is the great map. The DARE maps are adjusted according to the population size as of the census, the surveys that they did in the 1960s, which is why you get this weird national thing. Ohio River Valley, right there. And the cool thing about the Ohio River Valley, as you all know, is that it demonstrates that some of the language change that we have is based upon these traditional migration patterns, which blows people away when you tell them this. Every time I speak in public to a non-linguist audience and I tell them this, they don't believe me. And then I show them this map. I'm like, see this dialect map? Look at St. Louis right there. Gateway to the West, two giant spurs coming out here of language variation here. We can plainly see the Ohio River Valley being a geographical boundary between these two different, we all know this is 150 to 300 miles wide depending, right? And the great thing is, we're on the air in Indianapolis. Indianapolis is right here where the language wars are being, well, not wars, but like the encounters here. We get more calls probably from WFYI listeners in Indianapolis than we do anywhere else in the country. Even though we're on, for example, in all of Wisconsin, and we're on in Dallas. Dallas is the number 5 market in the country. Why do we get that? Because people are encountering each other here. Some of them speak more with the Great Lakes accent. Some of them speak more with the Southern. There's the Midland variations coming through there, right? And so we get this encounter. So I can start talking about mango in terms of traditional migration. I can talk about mango in terms of lexical variation. I can talk about it as an etiquette question. Do you correct your father-in-law? Do you? You're stupid, Dad. You can't say that. You don't really, actually. It becomes an etiquette question. And a lot of language comes down to that. It comes down to manners and etiquette. And we try to relay this information. And this is the OED entry, just so you know. The reason I showed you the Dictionary of American Regional English entry is because because it's far more specific, it has a lot more data, it's far more useful, but OVD is not a bad fallback if you don't have data on hand. By the way, they just completed the Alphabet Dictionary of American Regional English is now complete A to Z, which is brilliant, 50 years in the making. Actually, 50 years in the making, but more than 100 years in the planning. This is some information. I can actually talk about mango. I can say, well, it's interesting, you can find recipes about pickling that only mention mangoes, but they don't mean mangoes, they mean peppers. And I can, oh, go there. But, so there's all this different stuff. Ultimately, what we did, we changed it into a story. It's a story about the British history in India. The British went to India and encountered these strange fruits, but in order to bring them back, they brought them back pickled in the native way. And this particular kind of pickling took the name of the fruit. There was transference there. And then that name of the pickling was, that kind of pickling was then used for melons and peppers and other kinds of vegetables and fruits. And in some cases, that mango name then transferred from the process back to another kind of food. And you can see it in mango melons. It's kind of muskmelon that you pickle in this particular way, and in the mango bell peppers. Well, then the mango peppers arrived in the New World, and for some reason, we don't know why, as you all know, sometimes there's the reason behind these things, it died out in the rest of the country, and here it is left in the Ohio River Valley, where it's this curious local habit that allows you to distinguish and recognize your neighbor. And so then we start talking about in-groups and insiders and outsiders, and we can start talking about how you identify whether or not somebody is part of your tribe or your kin. We can even discuss shibboleths if you want, and that sort of thing, right? How do I know who is local? How do I know who is local? This one call gave us all of these different opportunities to talk about the work that you're doing or the things that you're studying. And this is, almost all the calls we take are like this. They all have this opportunity for growth and expansion for the common knowledge. There's no peeving anywhere in here. And nowhere in here do we get judgmental and say that you shouldn't use mango to describe a green bell pepper. Absolutely not. Why would we? We're going to stop them? It might be cathartic for people to bellyache about language. It might be, they might feel somehow that makes them superior. We all know about this. There's a certain kind of superiority that comes with judging the language of other people. But it's not a message that we're going to transmit on there. Frankly, it doesn't make good radio, and it's not good practice, and the information that goes with it gets lost. All that's left, if all you want to do is peeve, after the peeving is the negativity. You can see this. You can actually you can run the data, and people say, well, you know, I don't know exactly what they were talking about. They seem so upset about it. I worked in advertising for a number of years, and we would do focus groups. And almost the entire thing of focus groups is sentiment. I mean, and now there's in computational linguistics, there's this whole sentiment analysis thing. There are gigantic efforts to analyze data on the fly so you can figure out the mood of the people. What's the sentiment in Tahrir Square? You know, and look at Twitter and see if you can discover in the Arabic of the people who are tweeting from on site in this particular geographical radius are upbeat or downbeat, you know? But in general, in radio people figured out a long time ago that your sentiment needs to be above middling. It needs to be positive of some sort in order to get people to remember your information. So I know that, I mean, I can talk for 4 hours uninterrupted straight. What do you guys think about this so far? Does this relate to what you're doing? You see the relationship here. Yes, ma'am?
Like, for example, this morning I was talking to a chick on she's telling us about how we have one line of something that people listen to, information, to a layman who is intellectual.
Well, for the expert or the intellectual?
Just for the person who would rather listen to it in a way. It feels as though if we ever start talking about this stuff, it just starts to come.
Yeah.
It's like, how do I talk
And you know, we did this show has been on the air since 1998, and it's gone through a couple different hosts. There were two fellows, Charlie Elster and Rich Letter, who did it first, and then Charlie left the show, and my current co-host, Martha Barnett, took over and paired with Rich for a while, and then when Rich retired, I took over Rich's spot. So the show has transitioned. Despite the name, the show is completely different because we have learned over the years what actually works. If you are truly interested in communicating language information to the listener or to the general public, and some people are not. I should have included some slides. You guys would have loved these. There's always these link bait articles online. 10 things that you say that make you sound stupid. You've seen these, right? 50 mistakes that means your resume will go into trash. And you look, and some of it's pretty good. You know, they're like, okay, yeah, you should spell those words correctly. And some of it isn't. Some of it is this. Some of it is, I won't even get into this because I don't want to build that straw man and then burn it for you, but you know these kinds of articles. Some of it is completely lacking in any kind of data whatsoever. One of the biggest mistakes I've ever made when I started the show is I came in thinking that I could just refer to the data and people would automatically respect what I had to say. Well, the data show, you know, if you would look at the corpus, you know, I go to Brian Davies' BYU corpus and I'll do a search and say, you know, I can see here that the relationship between these words is actually X. People don't give a shit. They don't care about the data. They really don't. Does it satisfy them emotionally? Does it make them feel smart? Or at least have they avoided feeling stupid? These things, are they a member of the SMART Club? A lot of the emails that we get aren't anybody with an axe to grind. They have no question for us whatsoever. They might have a story to tell us, but primarily they want to nominate themselves as being a member of this elite group of people who gets the world. And we all do this. We totally all do this. To a greater or smaller degree, we all want to be seen as being included in the prestige group, whatever that prestige group might be. Yes.
So would you say that this is one
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, this is what we're doing. We are trying to make linguistics practical. I go to the conferences, whatever conferences I can, depending on my schedule. I go to LSA and ADS every year. I read the journals. I read all the language blogs. Whatever it takes, I try to keep up. And I read the popular stuff about language too. I try to pay attention to the shifts around us and changes around it. It's too much for one person to do. But within our domain, we can do okay. We make mistakes, absolutely. I mean, I get emails and they almost always start with, "You of all people," you know. And I get people complaining about my own language. They think that I should have the most correct speech ever. I should sound like some stuffy twat from like Nowheresville. Really, seriously. They absolutely do. And they will not buy the argument that if I were to have the most correct speech ever, that I would be insufferable. Because people who try to have that speech, they don't actually get a lot of respect from people. They don't. So there's all this kind of push-pull, and we've found a positive middle ground, the push-pull, where every episode we can have a little fun and translate some information, just a little bit. And we see the effects in our email. We get people who email us now and say, you know, I've been listening to the show for a while, and so I heard this thing the other day that really kind of surprised me, and I knew the first thing that I had to do was find out more about it. So instead of Googling, they just asked around, which is basic field work. That's what we try to teach them. So let me just, I've kind of covered this already. The reason this call is great, about language change and semantic shift, I can introduce a little bit of jargon, like the word isogloss, you know, that particular map. We talk about settlement patterns, and we can talk, this is a great one, by the way. I love talking about this because nobody believes me. People believe that we all are on our way to sounding exactly alike because of the pervasive media. And while there are some changes that are being perpetrated by pervasive media, what we tend to find, you probably, if you're a sociolinguist back here, what we find when we do sociolinguistics research is that some of the differences are becoming more striking and clearer, particularly with things like vowel mergers, where they're not talking, everyone's not talking like they do on Jersey Shore now, right? They're not. So some stuff is going more alike, but in general, we are starting to sound more like each other, and people do not believe this. But I always say, like, you are more likely to learn language from your grocer than you are from your television show. The person that you transact business with is more likely to influence the way you speak. The people that you respect, the cousin that you like, the uncle that you love to play with, or the whatever, whoever it is in your life that's most important, that's who you speak like. And it's almost never anyone on television. Almost never. You might learn the odd catchphrase, a joke, a funny word, but in general, these are fripperies around the edge of what is really happening in your language. The other thing that I like about this call is it's great radio. This is the important part. I mean, that whole mangled call could not have been put on the air unless these things were also true, or most of them were also true. Human relationships. How can I transmit information without language about talking about human relationships? That was the problem with my data approach. Talking to people only about data, soulless, right? It's HAL. It's a computer. They don't care. But what does a woman say to her father-in-law when he uses a word that she doesn't quite understand? That's a human relationship. That's a micro story right there. She talks about her own thoughts. She is reporting data to me. I consider this email and voicemail that we get from our callers to be accidental field work, where we are collecting this stuff, and I intend to keep this forever and always be able to search it and say, well, you know, this has come up before, and the last person who talked about it had the same circumstance. A great example of why we save this data. We had a call from the guy who's like, my name is Scott. No, my name is Todd. Why do people always call me Scott? It's a great question, and it turned out that when we aired that show, hundreds of other people replied. Some of them were all Scott and Todd confusion, and other people were like Jennifer and Stephanie confusion, or Debbie and whatever confusion. Everybody had their own thing, like where they consistently had seen their name being confused for another name over and beyond, like the what Arnold Zwicky calls the frequency illusion. You guys are familiar with this concept. You read language log, right? Arnold Zwicky's idea. He and Jeff Pullman have done a fairly good job of breaking down all of the different ways that the common person misunderstands language. And one of those is when they hear something, they perceive it to be more frequent than it actually is. But these people reporting on Todd and Scott confusion, the data is unassailable. It's there. It's in my inbox, and it's in our voicemail box. We've saved it. I have it for all time. And we can talk about similar vowels, and we can talk about the final consonant of the word. We can talk about being one syllable and all this stuff. And that's interesting, but the more interesting thing is in the aggregate, a lot of people are having this problem. The caller brings information. It is not a one-way show. We are not simply lecturing to a listener, and that's absolutely crucial as well. It's about food, really simple stuff. That's kind of like the human relationship thing. It's about food. We love doing food calls because they often have a regional component. They often have a variety of common names for the same thing across the country. People will sometimes send you food. It's very good, or at least send you a recipe so you can make the food that they're talking about. And the small story that I already related to, the story about the British in India bringing this food back, bringing this pickling method back, and here we have, in this family, in Indianapolis, and in her father-in-law, have a tiny little tidbit of that hundreds of year history in this one encounter at a barbecue. This is the thing that we're doing on the show. This is the way that we're relaying language. This is it. This is what I was telling you before. This is the most important thing about that call and almost all the calls. We do allow some peeping on the show, don't get me wrong, but we try to make sure that there's something constructive that comes out of it. Or because the caller is so hilarious, we can't just, there's nothing we can do but put them on the air because they're having a really good time with it and they're kind of tongue-in-cheek peeping instead of like angry pounding the table peeping. This difference and all the differences that we have in the way that we speak are something to be explored rather than be criticized. And I'm not your professor, and you have brighter people that you are learning from at this school, or you may actually be those bright people yourself. But this is something that I would encourage you to remember, is that when you are looking at the way to take the linguistics knowledge that you have and apply it, and you were looking at the classroom, and you were looking to make the pedagogical materials, or you even just simply finding a way to incorporate it into a document that you're going to share with other people who are non-specialists, you can't just not criticize and condemn, but you actually have to say you actually have to overtly say that there is a better way than criticizing and condemning. We say this on the show 1,000 different ways. I wouldn't be surprised if we say it a couple times an episode. Not in those exact words, it's always this little small thing. Right? But sometimes it's just a matter of diverting the caller from their critical path and trying to get them to tell us something that's actually more interesting and isn't about negativity. So what we're doing on the show, what we're doing with the information that you guys are learning here, or the information that you're uncovering in your own research, is we're informing and entertaining, we're changing attitudes, we're bridging academic and non-academic world. That is what the title of my presentation, what a bridge sounds like. It sounds like our show. Our show is a bridge. This here is no small part of it. This is, I got involved with the American Dialect Society in 1992. I wanted to be a better writer. Little did I know that I wouldn't actually become a better writer. I'd become a more complicated writer because I'd have to learn all these concepts and principles. And I often say this, I tend towards the socio-linguistic side of things. the American Dialect Society email list turned out to be, for me, as if I were living in Europe at the time of Isaac Newton, where I could eavesdrop on these conversations between some of the top minds of our day. And they're just sharing this information willy-nilly on this email list. And I learned. I'm still learning from these people who are doing the research, who are brighter than I am, who are teaching the classes, or uncovering things that I didn't know about. And now I'm actually repaying that favor. I'm trying to take some of the things that I learned from them and relay them to the rest of the world. This language self-discovery is kind of that's how I would describe that in a nutshell when I've talked about the mini field work that some of our listeners are now doing when they encounter something unusual. They go out and they say, well, Grandma, I've heard you say this expression a lot of times. Where did you hear it? Did your mother say it? Who did you hear it from? Now, where are you from again? And they will come to us with this basic information about place and time and frequency that we can begin to work with and kind of explore beyond just saying, hey, wacky, here's this goofy thing that Grandma says, right? Just a little bit more information. This is it. Ask. Divert annoyance. Ask people around you. Try to explain that emotion that you have. This is what we try to teach the listeners, and we do. This is my contact information. I keep all my information public on the web all the time. So I sometimes get strange calls from listeners, but I encourage you, if you've got a question or if you were too timid to say something today because you disagreed with me and you're worried I would be angry, then you call me up and be angry on the phone or whatever, or praise me if that happens to be the case. And that's the end of my presentation today. I can talk 300 words a minute if you want, but yes, ma'am.
I don't know if you mind me asking your own personal journey and getting to the point of you're not frustrated.
Yeah, so 1992, I'm at the University of Missouri about the time, actually it was earlier than 92, and the American Dialect Society email list, I got on the list in 92, that's when I first got on the internet, and it was on Fitnet at the time and some stuff, and I subscribed to it because I thought I'd be a better writer, right? And I didn't come with these predispositions. I'd always had awareness that language was different for some people, but I didn't know how to articulate it, I didn't know how to describe it, and I didn't know the scope of it. And so as I became involved with the American Dialect Society over the years and became an officer of the society and volunteered to host its website and started doing the conferences and stuff like that, I began to pick up this attitude from people like Dennis Preston. I think he's now at Michigan. But if you don't know Dennis, he's done a lot of popular work as well as professional work. The work of people like Walt Wolfram at the University of North Carolina, right? Walt Wolfram and Natalie Schilling-Estes have done some of the greatest books, I think, that I can easily take the material and release to the general public. He's got this, for example, my wife worked in that program with Walt. They've got this whole North Carolina program where they've created these pedagogical materials for students around North Carolina. They have this state requirement that you must take some kind of class related to the history or the culture of the state. And so they created this material that teachers and schools can pick up if they want and teach the language of North Carolina to North Carolina. So they talk about Gullah, and they talk about the Southern dialect, they talk about the lexical variation, they talk about the same stuff we talk about today. And so from people, so that's one way that Walt's doing that job of saying, look, it's something to be taught. And so I picked that up from Walt, and I picked that up from people like Ron Butters, who is a great guy, and he is specialized in done little onomastics in the language of homosexuals, and he's done work on just general, like bringing a little bit of humor to it as well. I don't know if you noticed, but like I'm trying to make this lively because it shouldn't be a deadly dull topic. Dennis Preston, I mentioned, by the way, he had a small bit part in the Do You Speak American that PBS did about 10 years ago. It's probably just a little too stripped down for my taste, the whole thing. But if there are people around you that aren't actually studying linguistics, or it's the kind of thing that you might, a Linguistics 101 student might dig, because it just lays out kind of the big picture of the way that we talk in America and why it is what it is. So anyway, I learned from all these people. I mean, literally on this email list, and as far as I'm concerned, these people are some of the top minds. Even the top lexicographers of the day are on there. There aren't that many English language lexicographers, people making dictionaries. There really aren't. And so some of them are on this list, and they've become acquaintances and friends and colleagues, and they taught me. Oh, the American Dialect Society email list. Yeah, it's a bit of a fire hose. And it's not the only thing out there. Of course, I read Linguist List and that sort of thing. But that's not very conversational. It's not very. Okay. So anyway, I learned enough there. So when dictionary jobs came up, I was qualified for them without ever having to take a class in it. And over the years, I've just had opportunities that I've either worked for or people have offered to me, and here I am. In ADS in Portland, I gave a speech similar to this. It was about the use of the Dictionary of American Regional English, and I apologize because there was a plenary address that Mark Lieberman. Do you know guys know Mark Lieberman? He's one of the big language bloggers, and he's with the Linguistic Data Consortium. And I don't know what all. He gave a plenary in 2007, and the gist of it was that somewhere along the way, linguists had turned over the public conversation about language to the literature types, the MLA types. And in a lot of schools, linguistics is being taught by people who are running the literature programs, and not by linguists themselves. And so what you get with a strange kind of bias in favor of all of the things that interest or are important to literature professors, and damned little of the things that are important to linguists. And you found that the basic linguistic concepts or things that linguists hold to be true are not being delivered to the students on these particular campuses. And his argument was that we should take that back. It's time that the linguistics program be yanked back from the literature types and put back into the sciences in a way, a little more in the sciences and a little less into the humanities as it was. And it's not a bad, I mean, I've simplified his plenary, which was beautiful and wonderful, and there's a slideshow online that you can find. But it's not a bad summary of the problem that we see ourselves in. Why is it that I can't really expect for an American audience to know that language change is normal and good? One really simple thing. Why can't I use a word like dialect and get people to know it? Why is it that when you tell people that you're a linguist, they ask you how many languages you speak, and not something about your profession? They don't even know the shape of the linguistic professions. They have no idea. And so, and ADS in Portland, ADS is American Dialect Society. We meet in conjunction with LSA. So I mentioned Mark's thing, and Mark had this slide. I should have put it in this deck. He had this slide in his slideshow that said, and many of the people who are talking about language in public today are not linguists. I'm not a linguist. I'm not. I have no training in it. I took a French degree at Columbia. I'm not in any way, shape, or form. But afterwards, I was very gratified to have quite a few people come up and say, "No, you're a linguist." Just by, I think it's about the attitude of the individual. I would argue that getting the degree isn't enough to make you a linguist. It's the attitude that's going to make you a linguist, right? The human aspect of it, the relationship aspect of it. Not on a resume, right? My wife is a social linguist. I am not a social linguist. I'm a lexicographer. So, by profession, I specialize in slang and new words, and that's what I do. I wasn't that bad. Thanks for coming. I really appreciate it. Yes, sir.
You talk a lot. I mean,
I do talk a lot.
Sorry, that wasn't in general. You had the opportunity to speak with a lot of people and their views on language. How many of people, well, I'm going to ask for exact numbers, but how often do you feel like you're getting called from secondary level English teachers? And how much of their view? Because, I mean, my view that the English language is static was kind of drilled into my head when I said, I thought, well, I meant to have that same thing.
Yeah.
Sophomore and junior year English teachers saying, this is what you say it correctly, and it's not.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you take that attitude and kind of flip it on?
I know, and my answer to you is hours long, but the really short version of it is three things. First, I'm not going to answer your question. So second, I describe that woman as Mrs. Frobisher. It's a name out of Mad Magazine. Mrs. Frobisher taught you in the 5th grade that X, Y, and Z were true. For some reason, you as an individual haven't updated your language knowledge. And she sounded so sure of herself, and you had such confidence in her when you were 10. She had authority, you were the student, you believed her, and you never saw any reason to question yourself. It might not have been the 5th grade, it could have been later, right? And so here you are, an adult, some people in their 50s, and they're like, well, I learned years ago 3rd grade, 5th grade, whatever, that I was supposed to, it was X. How could you say that? She was a great English teacher. Or I love the ones, my wife's an English teacher, so I would know. I mean, okay. Yeah, it's like the kid on the bus who's told me all about girls because his mom was a nurse. He brought one of her, he brought one of her nursing textbooks. It was very interesting. When you're in the 6th grade, that kind of information. Very clinical, though. It wasn't quite as exciting as every doll thought it would be. A lot of cutaway views.
Is that attitude kind of, is that kind of, from your experience, is that American attitude or North American
No.
attitude?
It's everywhere. The third thing that I would say to that is more of an answer to a question. As a dictionary editor, so you guys get the question, how many languages do you speak? When I tell people that I'm a dictionary editor, what they say to me is like, is there anything left to be done? They really genuinely, they're like, what are you doing? I'm like, well, you know, if somebody were to pay me enough money, I could make a new dictionary every year that had 100,000 new words in it. Easily. No problem. And not real words, not used once, but multiple times in multiple sources with bona fide citations, you know, but of course nobody's going to fund that multi-million-dollar effort. So the larger question is, how do you change that? You don't. Actually, you chip away at it. And what I usually tell people is like, I've just presented, you know, the radio show, by demonstrating that language change is happening and it's ordinary and good, by demonstrating without actually directly refuting that belief, that's the only thing that we can do is tick by tick. We get plenty of email from people who say, well, I recognize that language changes, but I always thought that the rule was X. And we're like, yeah, language changes, and actually the rule has always been Y, but people are under the mistaken impression that the rule is X. The ending sentences with the preposition. I mean, that's I stopped giving presentations about language myths because I mentioned this before, I have to build a straw man and break it down. People have these indistinct ideas about what language really is that come out in the Q&A. Q&As often, when I give a speech to non-specialists, are far longer than the speech itself. They can be hours. Because then this is when this comes out. You know, people like, it's changing out from under me. It's a quicksand. I don't feel like I'm on good footing anymore. Language, everything I learned is being thrown out. Language is being destroyed. It's going to hell in a handbasket. Nothing is true anymore. Black is white and white is black. And the sheep is lying down with the lion, right? Or the lamb, how does it go? The lamb is lying down with the lion. And you're just like, look, the bulk of language doesn't change. And what we're arguing about is this tiny little fringe around the outside, the corona of the sun, where the solar flares are, you know? For the most part, it doesn't change at all. It doesn't change. But, so, the subtleties and nuances, like the radio show, subtleties and nuances are lost on a lot of people. They don't. Like qualifying words and waffling words and hedging words are just lost. We have to be really specific about it. If something is, everything sounds clear, but even it's not. And I haven't really answered your question. I told you I wouldn't, but right? Well, no. What I'm saying,
I get what you're saying.
you chip away at it. You don't answer it. You chip away at it. That's the short version. Anyone else? Everyone else?
So you had mentioned that.
Yeah.
What kind of careers do you guys have?
I'm a journalist. So, other things. Right now, I am working on the show full time. I've been neglecting some of the back end stuff for a while, so took some time off to edit. I'm going to update the website. We're doing all the back end donation stuff. Like all of this back end stuff that you never see. Like I was saying, like an hour of radio requires a tremendous amount of support. All the stuff that has to happen before you get that 1 hour. It's not live, by the way. And there's no secret to that. Car Talk's not live either. So what we do is we collect all these calls, we pick out the best ones. Our callers, we call them up, record it, package a show. We'll mix some different calls from different recording sessions so that we have a well-shaped show that has a bit of an arc to it, or maybe has a good tone to it, so the whole show isn't kind of samey, rhythm. And so there's all of this kind of back-end producing and back-end money raising and the finances and the back office stuff and the website stuff and the listener support. In comic books, there's a term they called fan service. Do you guys know this term? Fan service is usually about showing movies to boys, but in our business, fan service is responding to the listeners. They come to us with a question, and if they don't get an answer, they are ticked off. They think of us as a reference desk, and I can't always answer all of them because it's too many, 15,000 phone calls and emails a year. We cannot possibly answer everyone, even if we had a couple of volunteers to help out, volunteers that we trusted who had a language education or at least understood the basic principles of what the show is about. So a lot of So that's my job. Martha is a writer. She's a journalist as well. Journalism, because it's often freelance, is very compatible with like the recording schedule and speaking schedule and that sort of stuff. And then our producer, she works on the show. That's all that she does now. And then we pay our editor / engineer. He's hired by the nonprofit to edit and engineer the show. And he's got like 6 bands that he's in. Yeah, he's good. He's got to fix the music in between segments. It's we've lots of compliments for that. Anybody else? Everyone else? Quiet people? You? Back there? You? Professor?
I did an article on light in American speech one time, and Jessica and Sarah know about it because they read it in my class.
Was yours the one that quantitative like?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, not the point. It was before there was the discourse marker light, the
Okay.
focus marker.
Okay, I think I may have referenced that. What's your name?
Underhill,
Okay. I may have actually referenced it. It might even been mentioned on the show.
probably. When it came out of American speech, it got picked up by the New York Times news service, and I started getting clippings from all over the country.
Yeah.
And I got interviewed by CNN. It was sort of like professor in California says it's all right to say light.
Of course, they always spin it that
And
way.
they got this guy, John Simon from New York, and they had some dueling interviews of whether you could say light or so on. And it still makes a wonderful project for a 101 class, because you can send students out to collect examples of light from the real world. And then you put the examples on a handout and give it back, and you go over it with them, and you say, look, where's the new information in the sentence, and notice the light is right in front of it, and so on. It's still very effective.
And it's still we get reports from Duke University Press, who publishes American Speech at our business meeting every year. We get a report on the most read articles, and that is still one of the most read articles. And maybe it's because you assign it. Yeah, the interesting thing about like and all that is most people still, their first response when they hear it, if they're a non-specialist, is they mention Valley Girls. And you just cannot get people to shut up about Valley Girls. They won't even believe you that the Valley Girl thing was mainly a media thing and not actually a real phenomenon. They won't believe it. They can't. And it's like, and I never talk about Ebonics. Never. Because if there's any way to make a room explode in flames, it's talking about Ebonics. So I don't use the word. And when people bring it up, I just don't even correct them. I just say, yeah, in African American English, blah, blah, blah. And they just don't get that I just corrected them without correcting them. Because it's just this politically divisive, the like stuff is really interesting. And it's a nice entry point, though, right? I could see that being a great 101.
So you sort of like a miniature fieldwork project.
Yeah.
And then we go get the examples.
And it feels contemporary, even though it's been an ongoing phenomenon for decades, right? It feels like something that's like on one of my to non-specialists. I have this kind of a pop quiz I do at the end of basically slang is old. Some slang is older than you think it is, and so I'll do things like crib, meaning home, and people always think that's really current. And I'm like, well, here's examples from 1500 of crib, meaning home, or the is infix as in faux shizzle. The is infix goes back ages, more than 100 years. And these people their minds are blown, but it feels contemporary to them, which is an entry point. Yeah.
What are some of the things that people kind of bring up as their grievances like recently kind of stick out?
They're all here, the great one, and there's a paper waiting to be written. I don't think it's been written yet, on sentence initial so. And you hear this in interviews all the time. So you're interviewing me and you ask me a question. And I'm like, so I started in linguistics in 19 blah blah blah, right? That so annoys the living hell out of the public because they don't understand it, and they don't know that soul has this. And they're like, what if I replace that with a well? They're like, well, that's better. But it's the same kind of thing happening there, and so you get to talk about discourse markers and all. Maybe you do, but usually once the word discourse marker comes up, you've already gone too far into Wonkaville, and they're not going to listen anymore. But I try to get in more into discourse analysis and that sort of stuff in the show, but it's hard to do well because there's a basic knowledge that they need to understand that I just can't relay in a few minutes on the air. I just can't get it. So I take it in bite sizes, just like the other things. But the sentence initial show. What's another? There's classics. The classics come up. Oh, I love this one. They all think Gone Missing is ruining English. Gone missing. Went missing. He went missing. I'm like, well, he didn't. I'm like, well, did you go fish? Did you go fishing? Whatever. They don't. The one they criticize me for all the time is often. I say often. Who says often? Who says often? Often. Yeah, a lot of people were told me that I'm a jackass if I say often with the T. And I can talk about dialects, I can talk about tradition, I can talk about history and show them the data, and dictionaries, and the pronunciation, and blah, blah, blah. And they're like, Mrs. Frobisher in 5th grade said it should be often. And they're like, what about, you don't say the T in soften, do you? And I'm like, well, they're not etymologically connected. I say the T in oft. And that doesn't ever convince them. So that's the thing about the peeving. The peevers tend to be, their beliefs are unassailable. You almost never can undermine them. Almost never. You just got to come at it from another angle. You know, here's what we're trying to do, basically. Again, I can talk for hours, so don't indulge me if you have something to do. You'll hear often this, people will say, when I was a kid, I thought the cats and dogs were the same species, and the dog was the male and the cat was the female. And it wasn't until years later that I had this epiphany, when I was far too old to still hold that belief. And I'm like, oh my God, how did I think that? I'm 19, I should have learned by now. This is what we're doing with language. We are slowly encircling their misinformation with correct information, so at some point in their life they're going to be like, holy crap, I'm 52, I should know this by now. How did I not know that before now? This is what I'm doing. I'm undermining these. I want them to have these two irreconcilable opinions until at some point the information we're giving them starts to win. And this one starts to crumble on its own. Not because we've attacked it directly, but just because your brain would explode to have these two incompatible ideas. That's our goal. It works, kind of. No deaths reported yet. All right? Good? Anybody else? Thank you for coming. I really appreciate it.